New allegations against Paul Manafort. In a new court filing, special counsel Robert Mueller and his team claim that President Trump's former campaign manager attempted to tamper with witnesses ahead of his trial. Mueller alleging that Manafort contacted people related to the case, where he faces charges of tax fraud and money laundering. Joining me now is former Whitewater independent counsel, former federal prosecutor, Thompson & Knight partner Robert Ray. What do you make of these charges, Robert?
It's the one thing that grabs prosecutors' attention. If you're a defense lawyer representing a client, the instruction after a case is charged is not to have any contact with witnesses. I don't know whether he did directly or indirectly, but if he did, that's a mistake. I mean, whether whatever you're doing may be considered in an innocent light, it's very hard to overcome the presumption that if you're contacting witnesses prior to trial, that your intention is anything other than to try to shape their testimony. So it is not unusual for prosecutors to react, aggressively whenever there are any signs that a defendant in a pending case is having contact with witnesses.
What jumps out at me is Paul Manafort has not entered a guilty plea, unlike there are 5 guilty pleas that the Mueller team has extracted related to this investigation, 4 of which are related to just lying to investigators of the FBI. Paul Manafort is not playing ball with the Mueller team. And so is this additional legal pressure to get him to cooperate?
Well, of course. I think, look, questions of tampering with witnesses, if the allegations are true, have independent merit, right? I mean, right. No one wants a prosecution compromised inappropriately. But separate and apart from that, the consequence, if it is shown that he was tampering with witnesses, is that his bail would be revoked. And that has a powerful incentive on a defendant who is not otherwise considering the merits of cooperation to consider the merits of cooperation.
President Trump, and it started over the weekend with one of his lawyers, Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York City, going on talking about the power to pardon, the presidential power to pardon. And the president himself asserted his absolute right to pardon himself. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, that's not entirely clear and is subject to some constitutional doubt. I mean,
right, which Judge Napolitano covered yesterday. But they're getting tough, and they're being very vocal
I think
out of the White House.
That's probably the bigger story. I mean, look, my own view is that I don't think the president has the power to pardon himself, because I think the Constitution envisions, first, that no person is above the law, including the president, and second, that following impeachment, the president, like anybody else removed from office, would otherwise and thereafter be subject to prosecution according to law. And if that principle is to remain true, it would seem to be inconsistent with the notion that the president would have the power to pardon himself. So,
but in terms of them fighting back and pushing back and driving the narrative,
I think that's the new legal strategy. I think people have taken note of that. I mean, I think that's the change that Rudy Giuliani represents, which is to say the pressure is being turned up on the special counsel to come to a conclusion. And I think the president is also right to suggest that having this matter, if it hangs over the administration indefinitely, is not good for the country. And if there is a way for the special counsel to conclude this investigation, at least insofar as it concerns the president, right, whether the president obstructed justice, whether the president was involved in collusion, and those findings can be reached and that matter resolved before the midterm elections, before it unduly impairs or affects the political process, obviously that's to everybody's benefit. Then the voters can weigh what the significance of all of this is in the political process and the ordinary course, but allowing special counsel investigations or independent counsel investigations to kind of hang out there as a cloud over an entire administration, so that when you come into office, you sort of come into office with a special prosecutor, and that special prosecutor lasts and is joined at the hip with you through a 4-year term or an 8-year term, seems to be, at least in my view and the view increasingly of a lot of people, not something that is in the country's interest.
Robert, does it disturb you at all that a lot of the people who are on the Mueller staff are Democrat contributors. These are not people who are truly independent in their way of thinking. Do you believe that there is a true independence, that these folks are agnostic when it comes to the political world of Donald Trump? Or do they have a view that will taint what they go after?
Well, Governor, I mean, you know that in the in the matters involving prosecution, you come with people and you take them as they are. They're professionals. They are supposed to be nonpartisan, but people do have political views. They're supposed to check those at home and come like the FBI and anybody else. It's not as if we all exist in a vacuum, and we also exist in terms of prosecution at this level at a certainly in the public domain and in the political process. But the point is, your point, and I think the president made sort of glancing reference to this, kind of referring to whatever the 13 angry men or the 13 angry prosecutors. Yeah. He has the right to question because there's been sufficient, I think, evidence of the fact that there's been some untoward communications involving the inner workings of the FBI and otherwise, and also people that sort of drifted on to Mueller's team to question motivations. Having said that, I do believe, having come from that world, that prosecutors do generally try very hard to check their political leanings and persuasions at the door and to do their jobs. And I think,
but the American people are right to worry, given what we know about what Peter Strzok and his mistress were saying to each other and things like that.
I think that's a legitimate question. It was a legitimate question for the president to raise. And the point is, I think your point to open this is that he intends to fight back, and he should.
Okay.
And
Robert,
he should.
Thank you so much, Robert Ray. Great to see you.